So, glory to Ukrainian heroes. Today, the 16th March 2023 year, congratulates you in the Military Media Center, 386th day of the defense of Ukraine. What are the components of the which compose the one of the types of armament, and is it a really glory of Ukraine is a tank 90M? So, I need a second myth, what is place, a bad joke with the occupants. Today you will hear from the representative of the Center of the General Staff of Ukraine, Senior Lieutenant Andriy Rudik. And if you'll have any questions to our speaker, in the hall you will have a microphone. Andriy, you can start. So, congratulations you here all the trainings and participants of the Russia is an aggressor country. Russia is a territory terrorist. This episode will emphasize the facts of the numerous crimes committed by the Russian Federation against Ukraine have long been known to you. However, did you know that at the same time Russia is a mystifying country, a lying country, a cheating country, and it's not only and not so much about the Kremlin propaganda, distortion of the facts and twisting of information. Today, we will tell you about how the so-called pride of Russian weapons turned to be a myth, which is now playing an evil joke with the occupiers themselves. Since the days of the Soviet Union, Moscow has liked to intimidate the collective West with its tanks, hearts, and show its armored fist in any opportunity. History remembers Hungary in 1956, Czechoslovakia in 1968. Not a single military conflict, not a single attack of counter-terrorism on democracy could without be products of the Soviet tank building, but the Soviet Union collapsed and tank construction disappeared. What today Kremlin propaganda is called tank Russian building is a pathetic parasite of the developments. Russian tank building, as a branch of the military industry producing new equipment, never rose. This is confirmed by the Tango-90 Mikey breakthrough tank. This is the main battle tank that adopted by the Russian Armed Forces in 2020. Deep modernization of the Tango-90 tank, as the Russians themselves say. Russian propaganda simultaneously cultivated the myth about the following and invisibility of this tank. At the same time, the emphasis was on the Russianness of the car. It was extremely important for Moscow to prove its ability to create high-tech weapons. All the time, the whole world was told that the Tango-90 Mikey is a high-quality and modern development that will break through the defense of NATO countries, like a sledgehammer. The Russians thought that they were able to imitate the entire civilized world with their tank, and they themselves believed that in 3 days the Tango-90 Mikey tracks would destroy the Khrushchev asphalt, but reality put everything in that place. Here are the tactical and technical characteristics of the machine. Obviously, without same explanation, they just organize information. However, even these figures which you see on the slide allow you to question the thesis of Russian propaganda about the Tango-90 Mikey and the know-how of the so-called Russian tank construction. The Tango-90 Mikey is an all-Soviet Tango-72 Bravo model of 1985 with several design solutions, including those stolen from the main battle tanks of the West. For example, the Nakitka weapon protection complex. This fact was established by military personnel for our center during the study of the Tango-90 Mikey trophy model captured by the Armed Forces of Ukraine in September 22. Today, we state that the Tango-90 Mikey is the upper limit of what the Russian military-industrial complex was able to squeeze out of Soviet developments. The extensive modernization of the Soviet tank of another exhausted itself long ago, when it's already leading to decrease in their combat capabilities. Therefore, the enemy unsuccessfully tries to compensate for the lack of quality and quantity. For example, the engine of the Bravo-92 Sierra 2 Foxtrot tank comes from the B-2 engine of the 1937 model, which was still on the Soviet Tango-34 tank. That is the part that the Tango-90 Mikey conceptually belongs, not to the era of perestroika, but to the time of Stalinism. So, on the one of fact that eloquently about the complete exhaustion, the modernization, like for example, as in the steppes of Ukraine, it powers drops in a third. The armor protection of the Tango-90 Mikey is conceptually no different from the Tango-72 Bravo. The complex of dynamic protection relic is a technological analog of the complex dynamic protection contact, which is used on the mentioned Tango-72 Bravo. The reality is that the only design solution that Russians managed to use to strengthen the armor protection of the Tango-90M is the addition of additional armor. As combat actions have shown, it's not thus save the car, but also creates problems with maneuverability and mobility. It's worth mentioning that the first time during the Russian Federation's large-scale aggression against Ukraine, the invisible Tango-90 Mikey was not destroyed by an air strike, not by an artillery server, and not even during a tank battle. A single serviceman of the separate territorial defense brigade of the city of Kharkiv turned the Tango-90 Mikey in a burn pile with the help of the recoil handgun Carl Gustav. This happened on May 4, 2022, near village Starosaltov in the Kharkiv region. A $20,000 gun destroyed a $5 million car. The undeniable fact of invisibility of Tango-90 Mikey. Our research has shown that there is more information that Russians are trying to hide than obsolete engine, a gun from the last century, and armor that doesn't fulfill its direct function. We are talking about the Tango-90M electronics. It is the automated fire control systems and their individual components, electronic computer machines, internal communication equipment, switching and control sensors, control panels, optics, etc. That turn a pile of iron cable into a modern main battle tank. Examinations showed that doesn't produce electronics for it, but also try to hide information about the origin of its individual components. Sometimes Russia simply passes them off as its own development. The publicized fire control system Kalina from Russian has only markings. You can see their elements on the expositions and put the questions to the officers of our center. Western Ukrainian sanctions hit the Russian tank industry hard. A direct consequence of this was of non-use microchips and chips of the most diverse origin. They significantly reduced the production of the resource of Tango-90 Mikey electronics. Though the Russian military-industrial complex simply cannot achieve the necessary important substitution. Sanction turned the production of Tango-90 Mikey from a serial production to individual production. Russia had only 100 units for such equipment in service. That is why the enemy, suffering large losses and trying to break through the defense of armed forces of Ukraine, is forced to deconverse old naked Tango-62 and Tango-72. The situation is quite natural. Without foreign components, this tank is not only impossible to mass produce, it's become a degraded version of the old Soviet Tango-72 Bravo. Myth about the invisibility and perfection of the Tango-90M and the self-sufficiency of a high-tech Russian tank construction have been started by the armed forces of Ukraine. Today, the Russian Federation lost 15 of Tango-90 Mikey units in Ukraine, and this only about these cases that have videos and photos recording. It's likely that the occupiers lost significantly more Tango-90 Mikey units. Now the enemy practically doesn't use them during hostilities. In order to not to finally disagree itself, Russia is afraid to expose this stance to the blows of weapons provided to Ukraine by Western partners. The Tango-90 Mikey turned to be a car for parades and tank biathlons. So the government of the Russian Federation in 2010 gave the name Vladimir to the basic version of the Tango-90 in honor of designer Potkin, who designed this tank, but de facto it was named in honor of Vladimir Putin, who also tried to imitate the USSR here. The Tango-90 Mikey was being prepared for the role of a triumphant tank that would bear the name of victorious leader. The role once performed the Soviet tank India Sierra-2, named after Joseph Stalin. However, heroic resistance of the armed forces of Ukraine constant Western aid support and the realities of hostilities turned the ambitions of Putin and Russia in a mountain of burnt metal. However, despite this, Russia has still not given up these plans to seize all of Ukraine. Moscow has a large stockpile of old Soviet tanks such as Tango-62 and Tango-72, which are currently being actively deconserved and modernized. That is why Russia is not being able to create high-tech machines. Russia is trying to overwhelm Ukrainian defenders with quantity, not quality. Also, the production of new and repair the damaged units of the Tango-90M, Russia continues to invent new tools to circumvent the current Western and Ukrainian sanctions, therefore destroying the myth of the invisibility of the Tango-90M. It's only one component of Ukraine's struggle against the aggressor country, the terrorist country, the lying country of the Russian Federation. Thank you for your attention. Thank you for our speaker. If you have any questions, you will have a microphone and you can put your questions. So if the speaker wouldn't be able to answer your questions, the representatives of the center will show you on the slide and tell you about that. So do you have any questions? Yes? Congratulations, I'm Lydia Serduk, the 5th channel. So often the Russian propagandists put the Tango-90M as a very modern tank, what is on the level of Leopards, which Ukraine will get from the Ukraine. Can you tell us something about that? So do you know if to be true, if to joke, it's like a funny commitment, because our researchers at all in our area of combats show that this type of tank can be destroyed by the anti-tank weapon, like a Carl Gustav. It's not like a big new modern recycling place. So, and also the research of our center, the servicemen took a part of working with the combat capabilities of our tank Bulat and of the tank T-90M. And the researchers showed that tank Bulat was taken to the combat in the 2004 year, and it is better than it's like named Russian new tank. And when we talk about the modernization of the Leopard in the second A6 or A7, it's more stronger tank than the Russian tank, not only in the armor, about the movement type and about the armament. Also they are more maneuverable, because in the modern combat actions it's a long time that tank has to be very armored and very strong, and also it's to be more maneuverable and to be able to provide combat actions successfully during moving back, maneuvers and others. So Tango-90M, it's not only about the propaganda, it doesn't do its functions. It's at all not can be against the Western tanks, anti-tank guns. So what it can be do against the Western tanks? We can tell about this for right now. Do you have any questions? Good morning, military representative. You talked about the communicative and the operating procedure of the tank Tango-90. Can you tell about the effectiveness of these electronic affairs? So we didn't stop on that. So here we can see the example of the communication procedure for this tank. There is a whole block, you can see them. As for this question, it's very interesting that not take into account that it's given like a new signal in these tanks. It's all the time it doesn't work. We also talked about the problems with the signal communication. The problem is very easy. So it doesn't work good with work. We understand that different temperature gauges over there, and a lot of water gets in the box, and we have some problems with cables. And you can see the new type here, or the 17 or 18 year. We can see them, but they look like from the 70s, from the last century. They are in the bad condition because of the corrosion and other different factors. So thank you. You also talked about the production of the tank came from the serial to the self. So what do you think? Is it really to stop the creation from the Russian these tanks? Yep, to be true, it's a very hard question, because from the open spheres and from our intelligence, we know that they are very slow in this production of the tanks, but we know that for the last years they produced 10 10 units of the tank Tango-90 Mikey, and for these years there was able only to produce 100 text from the beginning. So I can repeat one more time that they are trying to overweigh the sanctions, they're trying to find microchips, chips from not a military sector for usage in this sector. Here you can see on the table for the import chips and microchips, and they get them out of the sanctions, and where they change them from the civilian to military, and you can see it, and you can see the real situation. And I am not ready to answer how it's how it will be easy to stop all the producing of the tanks, because it's not my job. Do you have more questions, please? So, do we have the active defense or only active armor on the tanks, and was it help during the hitting of this tank? Do you have any statistics? So, statistics about the valid statistics, what will be significantly used, it's hard to talk, because today we have destroyed, recorded destroyed only 15 tanks. So if one was damaged from the Carl Gustav, second one from a Javelin, it's hard to talk about the statistics. As for your question about the dynamic protection, I mentioned about that. So not a dynamic, but action. So dynamic protection, when the special, like a special missile uses when the flowing rocket to the tank. So that report which was prepared with the tank Tango-90 Mikey, it wasn't found. Thank you very much. Do you have more questions? I see in the second row. So good morning everybody, Andriy Chizevsky, Army Inform. So from the open sources we know that on the tank Tango-90M it was planned to put a new automatized reloading system, and also the armament keeping, and was it realized or not? So I will tell you. Look, do you know what is the function of the reloading automatic system? So it's like a system from the Tango-72 Bravo. So the 20 rockets in the main part, and in the back of the turret more 18. So, but to fulfill the armament of the tank, you have to get out of the tank, and during the combat actions it's unreal, so it lowers de facto the prepared rockets for usage of this in the battlefield. So because you have to move out from the battlefield, reload this automatic system, and it's also a lot of question about the quality of this reloading system, because you understand it's very old, it's not a modern one, so we can't give the answer about that, because we can't see the enough units of the tank Tango-90, but we can really tell that it's an old automatic reload system what we had on the T-72. So can you tell please, in the context of the speech about the tank, we can't remember about the one more tank, a new tank, invisible tank also. I tell about the Armata, which is held by the Russians in their country. During the sanctions and the close understanding about this tank Tango-90, do the Russians have the ability to prepare and produce tanks Armata? So you know that combat actions and everything show that they haven't got any opportunities to produce tanks in serial way. Maybe in any modification of the old tank, but Armata is also an old Soviet Union tank. So you understand the main problem is that electronics, it's additional armor electronics, it differs the tank Tango-72 tank. So you understand that electronics can't be produced by Russians themselves. Because of sanctions they can't get new technologies, so they aren't able to produce new tanks. One by one they can do it, but serial production is impossible for them. and you understand that experience of usage the tank of Tango-90M is not the best tank, and you understand that they wouldn't produce it. Maybe it's one of the reasons that Armata wouldn't be seen in the battlefield in Ukraine. But I hope we will capture that and also tell you in the briefing about the tank Armata. So if Armata wasn't seen, can you tell please, do you have any examples of the unconservated Tango-62 and Tango-72, and are they really modernized to use against Ukraine? So if we tell about the Tango-62 and Tango-72, we know about them because we also were a part of Soviet Union, and all these technologies and researches we have, it's also public information. You can find it in open sources, and they have problems with modernization of the tanks. So because the main problem is how can you modernize this tank, using electronics or using any using any armor or additional defense. And if you will see the statistics about the losses of Russian Federation, you can see a very big losses of Russian Federation. Second part is about the electronics. For the previous journalists, I told that they have problems with getting electronics like chips, microchips and others, because all of the modernization uses in the same way, using a better armor or using a better side viewing device. So you understand, is it really modernized or not? Do you have more questions? So Vitaly Litvin, Army Inform. I'll have some questions. First one, on the communications of the tank, we can see the mark of Federal Bureau of Investigation of Russian Federation. You also, second question, you told about the Russian microchips. And what about the armament and the rockets of the tank? So do we have the foreign components over there? So thank you. A long time we had about these questions and interesting facts that they put the marks of Federal Bureau of Investigation of Russian Federation, like a special service. It checks this equipment, but specialists of the military servicemen of our center, we saw that this information is not used for secret and top secret information, so it shouldn't be checked by the Federal Bureau of Investigation of Russian Federation. So in the military higher command they mark these blocks, and you can see that any block is marked by the Federal Bureau of Investigation of Russia. So even microchips and chips have this special marking. So about the armament and about the armor, they can produce it by themselves. We know that they can produce the rockets, they can produce it by themselves. It's like an old armament, so it can be used, old caliber and that. So maybe a gun is a little bit modernized, maybe tube is a little bit stronger, but they can do them, and we have to understand it. Do you have more questions, dear colleagues? If there are no questions, we will thank our speaker for the interesting and real truth and informative information. And with the parts of the tank you can see on the tables on the exhibition here. Today we had a representative of the Center of the General Staff of Ukraine, Senior Lieutenant Andrei Rudek. It was a military media center, information center of Ukraine. Glory to Ukrainian heroes, protect ourselves.